Hello guys, today we will go through 10 problems that beginning Unity game developers run into. Creating games is fun, but if you get stuck it can be frustrating. So hopefully after seeing these tips you can have a jump start and create your own first games in no time. Let's start by creating a project. I'm gonna use a UOP project. First, let's add the starter assets. We're going to use these starter assets, so make sure you pick the right one. The add button doesn't work, so we're going to use the package manager from here. Okay, so we've added the starter assets to our project. And now we need to go to the package manager and go to the starter assets package and import the samples. Now the samples have appeared over here. And we got some third-person sample scene over here. So let's open that. So this is our demo scene, and here we will demonstrate the 10 tips. Let's also go to Mixamo and download this character with this animation. We will add the character to the project. Our first tip is about instancing objects. Now we have this scene where we can walk around with this character, but it would be nice if there would be some enemies. We have a model over here. We can drag that into the scene, and we can drag even multiple of these objects into the scene, and this could be the enemies. So if we now run the game, we have 3 enemies. That's fine, but this means that you need to create all the enemies beforehand. What we also want to do is spontaneously create new enemies, because for example we don't know how many enemies we will create yet. Maybe if we have a higher level we want to create more enemies to make it more difficult. So you want to be able to create those dynamically, and to do that you need to instantiate them. But how do you instantiate the objects when they are still here in your assets? One method is to create a script over here. Let's create a folder called scripts, and then let's create inside another folder called a spawner, and to this we will attach a spawner script. I've already created the script and I will show you the script. It's over here. We can spawn some objects. We have an area where we can spawn the objects in, so we can spawn them in a random position somewhere in that area. When we can create multiple objects, so we can actually fill this reference with multiple different objects, so we have different types of enemies. In this case I have only one type, so I will drag that into the list, and it will always spawn this type, the mouse. but you can add more if you want, and it will take a random one out of that list. And here is the actual code that's spawning the objects. So it will spawn it at spawn position, at the default rotation, and it will use that spawn objects array that we filled with that only one mouse. We can determine the position and the size of this area, and then if we fill that in these values, and we set the number of items, we can run the game again, and 100 of our enemy characters will be spawned. So the trick is here to drag one of the characters that you have into the scene and use that one reference to instantiate multiple new objects. You can also use the update function of this script to generate more enemies over time. Another method to instantiate objects is not to have this reference, so we can delete that, but then we can use the resources folder that's over here. You can create it if it's not there, create folder and then call it resources, and everything inside here can also be accessed from scripts that you have in your game by this way. So this pf mouse is found because it's located inside the resources folder. And we can then instantiate objects using that one object inside the resources folder. So now again we have 100 objects, but this time we didn't use the reference. Now tip number 2. Any changes that you make during runtime are lost as soon as you go back to design time. So for instance, we are now running the game. Let's take for example this character. Let's say we think it's not big enough. Let's make it a bit bigger. And now let's position it back onto the map. Suppose we want to have this. Now as soon as you stop the game, this change will be lost, and you need to do it all over again. This is a bit to get used to. It's just the nature of Unity. They chose to not save any changes when you make them at the runtime. It has sometimes advantages, but also disadvantages when you think you are just correcting something a little bit, and then you realize that you are in play mode and everything will be lost and not saved. So what you can do in order to save these changes is to select the object and then copy component. In this case, only copying the position would also be sufficient. But then we are stopping the game. Now the position is reset, but we can still paste the component values that we have copied. So now this change is permanent and the new location of this box is over here. So that's a way to deal with that, and it's you will run into that if you're new to Unity. Okay, now for tip number 3. You probably want to use some 3D models from internet. You can download many of them for free from sites like TurboSquid. I've added a few over here. Sometimes when you drag one of these objects into the scene, this is for example a shower, and now you try to run the game. all of a sudden your game is messed up. You will see only this screen, and it looks like nothing's happening anymore. But in fact, if we use the keys, we can still hear the person walking. Now the thing what's happened is that this model contains a camera. Some models already contain stuff like cameras. So if we run through the objects, you can see the camera over here. Let's check if there's any other cameras. Looks like this is the only one. So we can simply remove this camera. Because this is the 3D view. We can remove that object. And now our game runs again with a new model added. The fourth tip is about rendering problems. I've added this package HDRP oak tree to the project. It consists of some oak trees, and we have some prefabs over here. But you can see that they are all pink. If I now put them into the scene, they will stay pink, and also if I run the game, they will stay pink. The reason for this is that our current renderer does not know how to render these trees. We have 3 different render engines in Unity. We have the built-in render pipeline, we have the universal render pipeline, and we have the high definition render pipeline. And material is written only for one of the pipelines. What you can do is select the objects, and here in the rendering materials you can convert the materials to URP. In this case that is not possible. As you can see, the possibility is grayed out. What we can do is change this shader. So this shader, we change it for a URP shader, maybe the unlit shader. And now at least the object is not pink anymore. And we can even add the texture and set the right properties like alpha clipping to make this tree look good again. Sometimes it's just simply impossible because the shader is so specifically written for that one render engine that you need to completely rewrite it if you want to use it for another render engine. But sometimes you can just fix it like that by using one of the default shaders in Unity. And the best option is of course to convert the material if that is possible. Okay, let's try to fix this oak. We have some textures over here, so let's go over here and create a material. Let's call it matte leaves. And now we replace the material by this one. Let's add some of the textures. And now we should set transparency. Now it already looks better, but you can see that it's a bit white. But if we use some alpha clipping, you can see it looks quite cool now. And if we go to the bark and do the same, we get quite a good looking tree again. So that's how you fix problems with rendering as soon as you see that material is pink. Now for tip number 5, we're gonna change the enemy a little bit. We've got this mouse object over here in the resources folder, and we can instantiate multiple of them. I've added a character controller and an enemy script, and this is a simple script that makes the mouse move to a random position and then to another random position and so on. And also it uses the animator, the same animator as the robot uses. So this enemy can also run and walk like this our main character does. But this time we use this script instead of the third person controller script, because that is specifically meant for the player and this is for the enemy. So this is very basic. Just move to the position by moving the character controller. So let's take a look what happens if we run the game now. You can see that the enemies are actually walking, so they are using that animator. So that's all fine. The only thing is that over here you can see that in the console we receive a lot of warnings that something's wrong. The action event, the animation event on footstep is missing. It has no receiver. What does that mean and where does it come from? Well, because we now use the animator controller and the animations of the starter assets package, we can take a look at them and go to animation and select for example the player armature, which has the animator. Over here you can see all these animations, these different stages like running and walking. If you take a look at, for example, the walk animation, it has a lot of keyframes, but it also has some events over here called on footstep. They are very useful events because at this moment you should hear a footstep because the player made actually one step. But in this case we didn't have the method to implement some action that needs to be done. So you can either try to remove those events, but in this case it's read only, so I can't remove them over here. Then I should extract the animations before I can edit them. But a much easier way is to add a method over here, call it on footstep, just exactly like the event. And just have it do nothing, so make it a void method. And now you can see we no longer receive that error message. Now for tip number 6, we're gonna add a car to the scene. I've got this model of a car over here. I've also got textures for it. So I can set the material. Looks really cool. So now we can just put a script on this car. We're gonna create a simple script to make it rotate. Okay, we're simply gonna rotate the object around its axis. Let's run the game and see what it looks like. You can see the car is rotating, but it's not rotating like I want to. I want to have it rotate around the center of the car. So the problem here is that this model from internet doesn't have its origin at the center of the car, but on one of the sides. So if you rotate it, something like this happens. Fortunately, there's a very easy way to fix that. We can create an empty game object and put this one inside. Put this as at 0. And add another game object, temporarily a sphere. You can see that sphere is now on one side of the car. But if we now move the car and make sure the sphere is at the center, somewhere over here. If we now go back to the parent object and rotate that, you see that the car is now rotated around the center. So now all we need to do is move that rotate script to the parent and remove the sphere. And now let's try again. And you can see now this car is rotating around the center of its origin. Tip number 7 is calling one script from another script. Let's assume we want to have some interaction between the scripts of the player and the car. For example, if the player presses the T key, we want to make the car spin. In order to do that, I've added an extra action, make car spin, and bound it to the T key. So inside the third person controller script, I now have a function on make car spin. This function will be called automatically as soon as the T key is pressed. And in the car script, we have added the is spinning boolean, and only if the is spinning boolean is set to true, we will rotate the car. So how can we set this is spinning to true from within the third person controller script? First, you can make a reference to a game object. Let's call it car in this case. And then we can assign the car object to that reference by dragging the car objects inside here. After we've done that, we have a reference to our game object, but we want to refer to the script. So in order to call the script, we need to do a get component on the game object of the car, and we will obtain the script like this. Then we will simply set the is spinning boolean to true. And this way, now when we press the T key, the car is spinning. If you don't want to create a reference over here, you can also do without by searching the game object hierarchy. If you take a look at the hierarchy, at the root level we have this car object, and we can simply search for that. So if you go to the game hierarchy and find the car object on the root level, We can simply also call the get component to get the script, and we can change it that way. Mind you that if you now change this name of this object over here, it will no longer work. So this is not really recommended. Only if you have very stable structure that will never change, I would advise to use something like this, but generally it's better to use references. Moving on to tip number 8. You've added several lights to the scene, for example like over here, but you notice that some of the lights don't show up. Only 8 lights will light up, and any more lights will stay dark. The reason why these 2 lights are not showing up and only the maximum of 8 lights is processed at a time is because we are using forward rendering. We can change that to deferred rendering. If we go to this example project, we got the default profiles. So go to the settings, you see 3 different type of profiles over here: URP balanced, high fidelity and performance. Let's see what we are currently using. We are using URP high fidelity. So let's move to the high fidelity settings, and over here you can see the rendering that's set to forward. If we set it to deferred, the extra lights will show up. With deferred rendering you can have an unlimited amount of light sources. Tip number 9. Your character won't animate. To demonstrate that, we are going to change this robot to the mouse character. So let's drag in a mouse character and let's put him inside the player armature. And now we can remove the skeleton and the geometry, and we are left with only the mouse. Let's set it to its origin. But now if we play the game, we will see the mouse, but it doesn't get animated. There is, however, an animator, so that's not the problem over here, but it's using this avatar, the amateur avatar. And if we go to that avatar, it's a default avatar that's used by the robot. If you go to configure, you can see all the bones that are used to move the character and their respective names. But if you take a look at the model we're currently using, the mouse, then you will see that the bones inside here are called differently. They all start with Mixamo Origin because it's been downloaded from Mixamo. So these bones, the animation cannot connect them, these elements, to the proper bones that it needs to move. So in order to do that, we need to create an avatar out of this model by going to rig, humanoid, and create an avatar from this model and hit apply. I've already done that. And then we can use that avatar, so it's already over here. This is, by the way, the avatar. You can see that this avatar contains the Mixamo Oric part. And that way it's able to map the bones onto the animation. So, and now we see the animation being played. For the final tip, I've added a sound in our assets over here, an explosion. And I will add that to the car object, so we can use it to play an explosion, for example, when the car is smashed. But now, once you start up the game, you will immediately hear that explosion. That's because by default the play on awake checkbox is ticked over here. So this is a simple one. You can simply untick all those buttons of all the sound objects that are in your scene, and then you can run the game and it will not play the sound when you start the game. So that's it for my 10 tips. In my opinion, these are the most frequent problems beginners run into. But if you have additional tips, please let me know in the comments. Thanks and see you later.